right, this is a difficult gospel to disagree with, huh? Love one another as I have loved you. This is how all will know that you are my disciples, by the love that you have for one another. When you get down to it, this is the basic message of the Gospels. God is love. Love is of God. He who has love has God. I prefer the line from the last song from Les Mis. To love another person is to see the face of God. So that's the message today, that love is even more important than we realize. Now here's one way that we know that's true. One way we know it's true that love is way more important than we even realize. It is a consistent component for almost everyone who has a genuine near-death experience. Before I unpack that, I just think it's important to have it said at the beginning, there are phonies out there, maybe even a lot of them. It is not hard to lie about heaven. Back in the seminary, Bishop Don, once Father Don, he was telling us about a book he was reading where the author was claiming that heaven was 3 feet above us at all times, and that there are singing flowers all around you. Garbage can. He made it very clear, guys, you don't need to take that seriously. That is not a credible testimony. However, once you weed out those kind of loopy stories, a pattern very rapidly emerges. People will come back from the brink of death, and most of the time they will say at least one of three things, in addition to, the individual details of their own particular story. So the 3 things that we hear from credible, reliable, near-death experience stories are as follows. 1, they are happy to be alive. It's good to be here. 2, it's somehow going to be okay. They say that, maybe we don't have as much to fear as we originally thought. That is a very common message. And 3, the friends and family and loved ones of that person are the most important things of all. It's obviously the 3rd thing that's in line with our theme today. People will return after this profound spiritual experience, and they will almost always realize that love is absolutely critical, and that love is, in fact, stronger than death. As men and women of faith, it's our job to share that love with the world, from God, through us, to everyone. Some of this information I'm sharing with you comes directly from people who have had near-death experiences. Because when someone goes through something like that, generally speaking, they want to share their story with others. And I know a few people that have gone through that. In just the same way, some of this also comes from people who are friends or family with someone who have had that experience for the same reason. They want to share the story. It's remarkable. And basically everything else comes from, documentation and books. There's one more detail I want us to cover before we move on with Mass. That detail is this. This message of love is so consistent with respect to near-death experiences that it even applies when the person isn't religious. Because, you'd think that if it's all in our heads, that non-religious people would have fewer near-death experiences. And that doesn't seem to be the case. It's odd, but it would appear that the chances of having a near-death experience are actually pretty even across all demographics. There's no guarantee or anything like that. There's no recipe to have one. Don't recommend you try that. But it would seem that the playing field is plenty well even. Now, there was one fella who had a near-death experience and then wrote a book about it. and he was a neurosurgeon. He was a brain surgeon. He was a good man, very kind, highly intelligent. Obviously, he's a brain surgeon. But this guy had absolutely no spirituality whatsoever. His religion was neuroscience. He believed in the brain, and that was about it. As the story goes, he got sick. He became deathly ill, had a near-death experience, and then they brought him back and he made a full recovery. And when he was back to his old self and talking again, he said all the stuff you would expect from a lifelong churchgoer. He said he had visions of long-dead relatives. He had this sensation of peace and joy that he had never quite felt before in his life. And he could tell. He could tell that his family was praying for him in the hospital at his bedside. Okay? He could feel their prayers. Honestly, I can't even imagine that. In addition to all of that, again, when he was back to his old self, he knew. He knew as surely as he knew anything that good old-fashioned love is what life is really all about. And communicating that message is one of the top things he's dedicated his life to, in this chapter of his life. And honestly, it's that ultimate message of his, that love is what really matters. That is why I believe his story. If love is what he's come away with, well, that is an indication that he was not dreaming, and that he's not some phony trying to sell a few paperbacks. By the way, he's a neurosurgeon. He had plenty of money. No, whatever he experienced, whatever you want to call it, it opened his eyes to one of the most basic spiritual truths of all. God is love, and love is stronger than death. And naturally, all of this backs up the words and actions of Jesus Christ. His love for everyone, it permeated everything he did. It was in his miracles of healing. It was certainly in his acts of mercy, like with the Samaritan woman. It was in his whole earthly ministry. And the words we heard in the gospel today beautifully summarize the whole idea. Love one another as I have loved you. This is how they will know that you are my disciples, by the love that you have for one another. When you act out of love, care, and compassion, you are doing nothing less than acting in accord with Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And God is love, and he who knows love knows God.